Do you ever feel like one day your child knows how to do something and then the next you're shaking your head and they still can't do it? It's like they know how to find their way on a tablet, but when you ask them to turn off a sound to a new toy, they suddenly don't know how. It's really frustrating as a parent and it can try your patience. And that's why I've created this series of short videos just like this one to give you some tips and tools that you can start using right away. And in this video, I'm going to tell you why this is happening and what you can do about it. And don't forget, if you want more, you can watch any of these other videos at any time that works for you, because I've made these series so that it can help you make significant behavior changes with your children. So I recommend downloading our guidebook from kidsmoveandlearn.com. And if you want more, you can watch any of the videos at a time that works for you. And when you put the videos together along with our guidebook at kidsmoveandlearn.com, you can make significant changes in your child's behavior. But for now, let's dive into this video and look at why they can do something today or 1 minute, but then they can't do it the next. Did you ever wonder how the Statue of Liberty was built? They had to plan on how to build it big and beautiful. Surprisingly, it was sent across the ocean from France in pieces. It required a vision, a plan to create each piece, a plan for delivery, a plan to connect the pieces. Getting kids to change their behavior so they can follow directions can be just like this. When you have a vision and a plan, you can be more successful. And by doing one thing at a time, it can make it manageable and not overwhelm, and also foster quicker success because it'll develop some habits. So that's why we have this course, to help you as a parent, help you guide your children's behavior. So if you haven't watched the previous videos, I recommend going back and creating your vision, because in this video, we're going to start talking about the plan. And in the plan is where we need to start splitting the pieces. I call this breaking it apart. Look at your expectation and your vision that you've written down. And by the end of this video, you're going to be able to analyze your expectation and break it into pieces. Because what you may not realize is the end result is actually bigger than you think. There are a lot of pieces to your expectation and a lot of assumptions. So let's look at this teaching example. When I used to teach writing in 2nd grade, there was an expectation that students were able to write down all the directions on how to complete a task. And as you know, most children get stuck in writing and easily miss some important steps. So I had them think of this simple example. I asked them to write down the directions for making a sandwich. You'd think the directions were this simple, right? Well, some things were missing. Imagine if you asked your child to make a sandwich at home. Even if the child was a 2nd grader, what do you think you would see and what would you hear? Is this what you imagined? Does it sound familiar? Exactly. There are so many more pieces to making a sandwich than we realize. And something kept missing until we kept digging deeper and deeper. So let's look at the example of cleanup. It's not as simple to us because we make a lot of assumptions that things are visual, but yet there's a lot of internal pieces. If you ask your child to clean up, can you imagine this? It's like this inner dialogue that happens with kids. So I'm going to share cleanup in another way. Let's break it apart. When you break apart an expectation into smaller pieces, it's easier to try to figure out where it's broken. It's something that teachers do all the time. They break things apart and then try to figure out where they're going to help support a student. Same thing for you with your child. Break apart why they're not listening to you and the directions and expectations you have. And then you can narrow the focus on how to help them and target specifically what the problem is. Here's an example of cleanup broken apart. If you were told to clean up and had never done it before, these are all the different things that might be needed to help follow those directions. So think about what is your expectation and all the pieces if you were to break it apart. Pause the video right now and write it down on a sheet of paper or in the guidebook. There's a space for it. Break your expectation into pieces. And there are no right or wrong answers. You can always come back to it and add it, but just start to really think about and break it apart. Once you've broken apart the expectation, imagine all of these smaller chunks. Now the step is to figure out what your child can do among these chunks, because it can be really frustrating when they do it when you don't want them to do it, but then they won't do it when you ask them to do it. Like, for example, did you ever notice a child will do it for their nanny or the other parent, but then they won't do it for you? So we're going to look more closely at that now, and then in another video, dive really deep into it. Look at all these parts in your expectation and check mark all the things that you've seen your child do, even if it's in a different context, like with another parent, because we want to look at what they can do and what they can't do. And then we could work on changing that behavior one piece at a time. Here's the cleanup example. I've noticed in years of working with young kids that often the ones that are checkmarked on here are much simpler for them to get first. Think about your child. Take a moment, pause the video, checkmark or X all of the pieces on your expectation. Now, I know it can be really frustrating if you're putting a check mark to something where that child does it for someone else but doesn't do it for you. So you might just want to make a quick note on that also, because we're going to dive deeper into another video on why that might be happening. So you'll keep this paper handy to reference later. Another thing to keep in mind with all these pieces is that sometimes the pieces are best learned in a specific order. Like they build on each other, or else it doesn't really work well. Like, for example, if they know how to hold a knife, but then they can't spread the peanut butter very well, then they would need practice holding a knife. And then talking about dipping and spreading, well, peanut butter is sticky and hard to spread. So if you really wanted to teach that skill, you might start with jam first. And then once they know how to hold the knife and use the jam, you can add in the peanut butter. So you practice with easier things and then make it harder. So right now, just make a quick note about how this might stand out for you. And later on, we'll pick that apart and figure out a little bit more. In this video, we cover two really key things: that an expectation can be broken down into smaller chunks, and you can work on one chunk at a time. And when you analyze these parts of an expectation, you'll know where to focus. And that way you can work on one chunk at a time to get them to start following your directions. Remember, this is one video out of a series. To make this meaningful for your individual situation, go to kidsmoveandlearn.com and download the guidebook or review your notes and follow these 3 suggestions. And then when you're ready to come back to the next video, and we will dive deeper into all of these notes, so don't lose them and bring them back to the next video. And if you found this really helpful, go ahead and share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe and follow us. Thanks.